Do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending these assets? Have you penetration tested these public assets? Start 2017 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night. Welcome back, everyone, to Startup Security Weekly. Quick announcement. Matt, have you heard of domain tools?
No, not the company.
Okay, so
the name of a company?
Yeah, it's Domain Tools. They have a product called Iris. They essentially started out as just collecting, who is data and information about domains and IP addresses. They pivoted into security because they realized that the most value people could get out of this data was security related. It's kind of similar to ZeroFox, or rather on the social media side. Domain Tools is on the domain and IP address side. And what I really like is they provide the facility that allows you to do things like, well, this domain was seen in my environment, or someone was trying to access this domain, and it turns out that domain's bad. And they can look at the registration information for that domain and say, hey, this threat actor also has these 100 domains registered. You should just go ahead and block those before attacks happen. So it's kind of that precursor type stuff. They're doing a webcast. I highly recommend our audience check it out, domaintools.com/security weekly. And Kyle and Tim from Domain Tools will be doing that. They're outstanding security researchers, so make sure you check that out. And visit wildwesthackinfest.com. There are still tickets available. Wild West Hackinfest, HACKINFest.com. All kinds of hands-on workshops and talks from those in the security community. There's training, there's conferences. October 25th through the 28th is when it's taking place in Deadwood, South Dakota. Matt, you'll have to come join us for that. You're not far. You're in Denver, right?
You
can drive down.
Drive over.
Yeah. It's like 6 hours, 6 to 8 hours, something like that.
Yeah, I think probably closer to 8. You got to get through most of Nebraska, I think. And
that sounds riveting.
Oh, yeah, I've done it 3 times.
Lots of corn, right? Oh, that's funny. Yeah, hopefully we'll see you out there, Matt. Okay, so what are we talking about? Oh, we're talking about what Matt does, increasing sales by evaluating your marketing strategy. This is exactly what you do, Matt, today. Before you, I'm assuming, find a home someday. Someone's going to want to hire you. I just know it. But I know you and I have talked that you're doing this for a lot of companies. And it's interesting, the opening statement says, sales is about people, accountability, executing on time, discipline, projecting margins, and having a plan that evolves constantly. I thought that was pretty good, dude. Like, I don't think I would change really anything about that statement. How about you?
No, I wouldn't, except for what's the message, right? I think one of the challenges that most of these startups are having right now is getting awareness and really articulating what I call their why.
Yeah.
Why would a customer go to anybody's website? Obviously the cybersecurity industry has gotten hot. And so there's a lot of noise out there, and you have to figure out how to get to your key audience. And so you need to understand a lot about, what problem are you trying to solve? Mm-hmm. What's your point of view? Why is it different or better than anybody else's? What's that, what I call power position, or what's that value you're providing back to the customer? And once you have that, and you can start to articulate that, you can really start to drive campaigns and sales momentum as part of a go-to-market strategy. And this is where I've, since I left Tenable, kind of where I've been spending a lot of my time.
You make it sound so easy, Matt.
Companies. Oh, it's
it's
not.
Really not.
It's funny. It's not. The story I like to tell, and it's okay because I'm doing a little more for them now. Is I was meeting with the CEO of AutoMox. Mm-hmm. Used to be a company called Patch Simple, changed their name to AutoMox. Ron Gula was an early seed investor, mm-hmm. and introduced me to the CEO. And we were trying to figure out, okay, how can I help AutoMox? And, I'm like, Jay, we got to work on your messaging, right? I got to articulate what is it about you that really makes a difference, makes mm-hmm. you stand out over other patch management solutions, right? And he's like, I think our messaging's good. I think we're pretty good. He goes, but can you validate it for me? Can you go out and talk to some of our customers and just kind of vet the message? So I'm working with their guy from marketing, and I get their messaging, and I said, hey, Todd, you mind if I tweak this a bit before I do the validation? He's like, yeah, go ahead. So I tweak it a little bit, and then I go out and I've vet it with a number of their customers. I met with one prospect and 4 customers. I said, guys, is this why you're buying, right? Does this resonate? And I finally kind of got the messaging framework down. So I shared it back to Jay, the CEO, and the light bulb popped on. And he goes, I get it. He goes, I thought I had it, but he goes, now I see it. I see what you meant by really articulating the message. Because for him, it now allows him to drive his strategy going forward. It aligns his product roadmap. It aligns all of his marketing campaigns. It aligns what he's telling investors as he goes out to raise money. It really solidified the message for him. And it's not easy because everybody thinks they have a good message. But when you run through the process and you kind of extract out these key elements and you see it on paper, I think people really start to go, aha, now I get it, right? And now I have this consistent message that I can drive into the market, which will really drive my go-to-market strategy and campaigns and really help sales. And they've made a lot of those changes. They've been doing a really great job continuing their growth on the MRR side. And they're a great example of kind of, if you do it and you can get everybody there, the results are, you can start to grow revenue from it. And so it gives them a good foundation.
And that gets harder as you grow as well, as your message changes, as your products change. I feel like for a startup, in your example, right, that was an easy example. Well, it was difficult, right? But it's easier to do it at that stage than to do it for a much larger company that has maybe made acquisitions and they have to constantly reinvent their messaging. Now you've got a lot more people involved, you've got a lot more customers involved, and you've got maybe multiple messages that you're sending out. So
exactly. And so you've seen others struggle with this in the industry, right? We talked a little bit on the last segment about Qualys, kind of simplifying the message a little bit because they added a bunch of stuff to the platform, and they went through a rebranding, a remessaging exercise. They have 9 or 10 different solutions now on the cloud platform.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Customers remember 3. So what's the 3 core things that Qualys does? So every company has to kind of go through this process. And when you do it, it doesn't end. It's not like you do it once and it's over forever. Every 12 to 18 months, you got to kind of revisit this to say, is that still our point of view? Is that still where the market's going? What new trends are going to change the direction? How does that impact our message and what we believe our core strengths are to our customer base? So, this is something companies will have to go through roughly every 12 to 18 months. Maybe they won't make any tweaks. Maybe they'll make major tweaks, but it's this ongoing process.
This article, next one, is about building a business you'd never want to sell, which I think is interesting. I think there's a lot of mixed messages inside of this model. I think that my thinking is, and it talks about the difference between taking money and not taking money, continuous bootstrapped, right? And the argument is the only way to build a business is to never raise any money, because when you raise money, you sell your soul and lose control of your company and are beholden to evil financiers. Right? But the argument for sale is, well, capital is scarce and it'll help you grow, and if you don't raise money, you're never going to be worth anything. What I've gleaned after doing 50 episodes of this show is that you should always consider your exit strategy and being in a position where someone would want to buy you, or being in a position where you could IPO. And if you kind of have those as goals, even if you want to keep your own company forever, and that's fine, having those goals, I think, helps you build and grow your company in an appropriate way. I don't think you should just discount any kind of exit strategy. You agree, Matt? Disagree?
Yeah, well, you've got to decide kind of long term, do you want to exit, right? So think about your show, right? you love what you do. It's this thing, right? It's part of your identity, right? You're probably not thinking, well, what's my exit strategy for Security Weekly? When I'm doing this consulting, I'm doing it because I enjoy the kind of work. I'm not going to turn this thing into a huge consulting company by any means, but I enjoy doing it. So I do it because I love it. I think founders have to kind of sit back and say, okay, why am I doing this? Am I doing this because I want this to be my lifestyle, because I enjoy doing this and I'm not worried about selling, I'm not worried about raising capital? Or am I doing this because I want to take this thing to the next level and you eventually exit, right? And so you got to kind of know that going into, I think, any kind of startup or any kind of new business venture, and then really start to articulate, what's the exit? Because the exit, we talked about this a few weeks ago when I was on the show with some startup advice, right? Depending on what you're trying to do from an exit, also will identify who you may or may not want to take money from in the VC world if you want to go raise capital. So let's say you want to be big. Do you want to get bought by a strategic, or do you want to go IPO? Those are two very different paths for a company. Truly are, because go IPO, I mean, you're going to try to build a unicorn. You're going to constantly go out and raise funds. The CEO just has to know they're going to be out on the series tour all the time. And that takes a special kind of CEO, one that wants to go out and raise money every 12, 18, 24 months. That's a different lifestyle than, hey, let's build some really cool tech that becomes a tuck-in acquisition at a strategic that changes their overall perception, right? There, you don't need to raise the same kind of capital. It's all about building value in what you're doing that also then benefits that strategic, and then building the right relationships with those strategics to potentially get bought. It's a very different raise scenario, and it's a very different set of venture capital firms, I think, that you go raise from. So those are just things you have to think about when you go into, hey, I'm going to go start a business. What I'm doing now, my wife said, well, you're going to go work full time again someday, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm looking for the right opportunity, and when I find it, I'm going to go because I love the space. But I can keep doing this for a while, and I can do it on a part-time basis. I don't know that I'll ever wind the company down because I enjoy helping others in the community. Right. I have useless, well, maybe it's useful knowledge on the space, and if I can help somebody do a better job in the space, then great. And if I can do that part-time here and there, fantastic. If it becomes full-time and this is all I do until I retire, I'm good with that too.
Right. The next article here, Matt, it's interesting. I agree with some of the points, certainly not all of them. 10 ways to preserve cash as a bootstrapped company. And I'll just go through some of the points. Reduce operating costs by working remotely. I think, if this company's really small and you're just getting it off the ground, sure, the initial founders can certainly work remotely. However, I think that depends largely on your goals that, Matt and I were actually just talking about. There's a certain benefit, I think, to being in the same physical space with your company and its employees that are going to help you grow. I think some roles can certainly be filled remotely. Over time, I've kind of seen the value in having employees here in the office, especially in that startup and growth mode, because it's really important for communications. As much technology as we have, there's nothing like being in the same room. I don't know how you feel about this, Matt.
I agree, and I see a lot of this right now. A lot of the startups want, certain roles locally. It just, because you want to build that camaraderie, you want that face-to-face interaction on a daily basis. And so doing that remote's tough in the early days. That's why I spend, one day a month now up in Boulder with the Automox team, because face-to-face is the best way. I do some stuff remotely for them, but it's reviewing blog posts and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But we got to be face-to-face. That's how we get stuff done. So yeah, I agree. Early days, it's tough. Now, interesting ways to do that is sometimes some colo, split a space with somebody to keep your costs down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Instead of having your own dedicated space. That's ways to still get a local office, but maybe keep your operational costs down a little bit because you're not buying a big office space up front.
Right. Especially when you're in a city where that space is super expensive, like San Francisco, right?
Right. Or New York, or Seattle.
Yes. Make frugility a company frugality. Frugal. Be frugal, in other words. Which I agree with. I think that the best time to start a company is when the market is somewhat weak, as a general statement, because it teaches you how to do more with less. And I think those are good lessons to learn, rather than starting a company when it's really easy and everyone's just buying it, and then you never learn to be frugal. So I'd agree with that one. I don't know about you, Matt.
Oh, I agree. I'm frugal in my everyday life. I run the business the same way. It's just, until you're ready, it's hard to go out with big bangs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard for smaller startups to make that kind of big bang early on. So, be a little frugal on the initial, but when you're ready to go, you've got that message down, you've got that product and those value pitches down, you want to start to raise some noise, that's when you have to start to spend some money.
Right.
And so but you still got to do it in the right way. What are the right types of events? What are the right types of campaigns that drive the most return on investment? It does matter. You still can't throw that money around and waste it. So you still got to kind of pinpoint what those right programs are.
Yeah. And that's really one of the more difficult things to do in business, right? Is figure out where are you going to invest in your own company. It's of course something everyone has to go through that has a business. Hire contractors instead of full-time employees. I think this is so specific to the situation that it's hard to generalize that as advice for a bootstrapped company to be frugal. Would you agree? Disagree?
I agree with it, though. I agree.
You agree with
because that's what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some of these smaller companies can't bring a guy like me on full time, but I have knowledge that they want, right? And so there is a way to get some of this knowledge out from consultants on a part-time basis, where you don't incur a big salary and a big operational cost. So I think there are ways to do it. That's what I've kind of been doing the last few months, because finding a company big enough to say, hey, Matt, we're going to bring you over full time, it's tough, especially when the company's 10, 15, 20 people. It doesn't work. But can you leverage that skill set in a consulting role and to help you get some stuff done? Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think for certain positions, you're almost kind of forced into hiring a contractor, such as if you need help with your cloud deployments early on, you're probably looking at a contractor for that, right? Because you're not going to be able to afford a full-time cloud architect. You and I think have had this conversation before, Matt, right? Like they're hard to find and super expensive. So,
right, exactly. And when we did Control Path back in 2004, we outsourced the original engineering work. I would never recommend that. The developers have to be yours, right? There's other roles you can outsource. You can outsource some marketing folks. You can outsource some architecture, some other stuff. But core development, I don't recommend outsourcing. You need that skill set in-house, and they need to be there 100% and invested in the company.
Just one reason why I like their other advice, which is build an amazing internship program, which is exactly how we rolled at Offensive Countermeasures. I mean, that's how we got the product off the ground. Was I'd also couple that with have someone at the company that is equally as amazing at building and managing an internship program. And I've never felt like I was that person probably up until this point. And I very much learned from John, who is that person who can build an amazing internship program. And I wasn't comfortable with it until now. So much so we built an amazing internship program here at Security Weekly. There's actually 3 internship or 4 internship positions open here at Security Weekly. And I think it's crucial to finding talent, finding local talent. We just talked about, working in the same office, having your developers in the same office. It's great for that. So,
Yeah. We didn't do it at Tenable until much later, much more established. But
Yeah.
they've run a very successful intern program over the past few years. I had some great interns come in on our team, do some really cool stuff in doing total addressable market analysis through regression of our sales data analysis. Just some really cool projects that came out of interns working for us for the summer.
5 ways which founders botch their pitches. Overconfident name dropping, market size misses. That's a popular one. Subtle signs of character flaws, and basically not listening. Do you agree with that kind of characterization of botching your pitch?
Well, there's always a couple things.
Market size misses, I feel like, is one of the most common, right? Like, I'm going to sell to everyone, and everyone is going to want my product, and we're going to sell to millions of people. It's like, no, right. You're not.
No.
Yeah.
Well, again, this goes back to a little bit of what's the problem you're solving, who's the buyer, right? If you can't articulate that in a pitch, you're definitely not going to have a good handle on your total addressable market either. You have to know those basics. And so those are definitely interesting ones. You have 2 ears, 1 mouth. We should listen twice as much as we speak, right?
Matt,
I did the VC tour for a couple of years with Control Path, and one of the things that I learned through that process was part of it was overestimation of the market, but it was also, what are the trends and stuff that the VCs are investing in? Do you know your investors in the pitch? What are they investing in? What are the areas that they're looking for? Back in the early days of GRC, governance, risk management, and compliance, it was right after the Versa acquisition by SAP. And all the investors wanted something that was kind of in the process that could stop something from happening, right? They didn't want just a questionnaire tool with workflow and stuff. Everybody wanted, hey, Versa can actually stop a purchase order if it doesn't meet these compliance requirements, kind of stuff. So they were looking for that disruptive technology. We didn't have it. And so our message is completely missed with the VCs because they were looking for something completely different.
Right.
Yeah.
I also, one trend that I hear, Matt, along these lines, and it's not just with, pitching investors, but I think, pitching your company to anyone, is when you ask companies, well, who do you want to target with sales in security, if they have a security product? And most of the time, people say, well, we want C-level executives in big enterprise businesses, and that's what we want. We want Fortune 1000, Fortune 2000 C-level executives. That's not always the case, though. I just, sure, that's one group you need to message to, but everyone seems to focus on that. And I think it's a lot of times they've just overestimated who they're going to target. They think it's just going to be magic. Like, we're going to target the C-levels and we're just going to make a lot of sales. That's not the case, though, right?
No, because the C-level typically is going to have somebody else that's really driving the analysis and making recommendations. Now, they're part of the buying process. They ultimately have to sign the big check, but it's rare that you're demoing directly to the CISO of a Fortune 1000 company, right? Very rare. I mean, there's certain cases where you can, but you're just not there. I go back to Automox a little bit because these guys are, they're security play, but they're really an IT operations play. It's patching. Who owns patching? IT ops. Yes, there's a security slant to it, but once you understand that your buyer is IT ops, then you start to understand the challenges of IT ops patching and why, security's not in the environment from a patching perspective, right? So they actually kind of cross some boundaries. And so when you can articulate your message to the people that are buying, you're much more successful. They're not selling to the CISO, and they're not selling to the Fortune 1000s because the requirements there for patching require a bunch of testing and out-of-band deployments and all kinds of things that create a lot of complexity to the patching process in enterprise. But for the small to medium enterprise who doesn't have the staff, that has kind of a combined security IT role, and they need a way to apply patches effectively, the solution's great. You can drive a business that way. You don't have to go after the enterprise all the time.
Onto some startup news and notes. I'm kind of skipping around in Michael's notes for this show. Are you familiar with guidance software?
Yes.
Digital investigations and endpoint data security solutions for retail and finance. I've heard of them before.
Yeah, they were more on the. They
ahead.
were doing like forensics and. They were doing forensics and stuff at one point on the endpoint.
They got acquired by OpenText. OpenText acquired guidance software for $240 million.
Wow.
Interesting. I've never heard of OpenText before. I don't know what OpenText is.
I haven't. I don't either.
OpenText is a global leader in the enterprise information management. Interesting. WatchGuard acquired DataBlink for an undisclosed amount. This one I am familiar with because we talked about it on Enterprise Security Weekly, because it's very much an enterprise, enterprise-ish play. I mean, WatchGuard, I think, primarily targets more of the mid-market. Although, as I've learned, the enterprise market is somewhat different, because you have enterprises that have one or two security people and enterprises that have teams of like 30 people, but they're similar in size and in the same industry. So how they're structured in IT can be very different, which plays into a lot of how you sell into the various markets. But DataBlink is a two-factor authentication, an authentication company. WatchGuard acquired that to add into their portfolio. So basically, mid-market businesses can buy this and get the authentication piece with it. I think it was a smart move for WatchGuard. I hadn't heard of DataBlink before, but two-factor authentication, I think, is a huge emerging market, and this is just some evidence of that as well. I wouldn't be surprised
acquisition by WatchGuard.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more acquisitions in this area. It really seems to be a hot market that has now like multiple sub-markets. So there's companies that target developers in managing their authentication and credentials. There's ones that target larger enterprises with two-factor authentication. There's all kinds of things happening in this space, which I think is pretty interesting. So I'm sure you're going to see more.
Yeah, and I've gotten a lot of pings lately about aspects of the authentication market, the PIMs and the PAMs. Obviously, what's the value in the PIMs and PAMs? Duo's been doing really, really well on the two-factor authentication side. People just love that technology, and you're going to see some new startups. CallSign took $35 million a couple weeks ago. They're doing adaptive auth, looking at a lot of different factors as part of authentication. So you're going to see some more moves in the identity and access authentication space, which will be interesting. But yeah, I've been getting a lot of pings about some of these guys lately.
Awesome. Very good. Well, I think we kind of covered our journeys. Matt and I talked about some of the stuff that we do for our jobs today. Expect a product announcement pretty soon for offensive countermeasures. Actually, John and I have been in touch lately. We do talk every once in a while, other than on Enterprise Security Weekly. We tend to be very busy, but there's some always exciting things going on there. And Matt, thank you very much for sitting in on this episode of Startup Security Weekly. That'll do it for the show. Thank you for listening and watching. See everyone next time.